There were several meetings with Roosevelt and Churchill that they had at the end of World War II. And then after Roosevelt died, meetings with Stalin and, of course, Harry Truman. And those were public meetings that they announced each time months after it had happened. And he talks about in there how the Soviets, who'd been our ally during World War II, the West said, how do we set up a police state domestically? How do you set up a police state? You need an enemy. And they said, well, we'll demonize you, you demonize us. We'll cover your atrocities, you'll cover ours. And then we'll have proxy wars with each other so we don't ever have to nuke each other. And we'll take half of a country and you take the other half. You take half of Korea, we take the other half of Vietnam, the other half. We take half of Europe, which they divided Germany in half, of course, and took over half of Eastern Europe. We'll divide it all in half with you. And that would, at first, was even public. And it was all staged, every stinking bit of it. Oh, it's not staged when you're in a foxhole, you know, fighting communists. But it's staged when you're in the upper command and you're not allowed to bomb actual factories in the north. And, of course, it got declassified 2 weeks ago that the U.S. wanted to nuke China with Russia. In fact, reprint me that London Guardian article. The headline was, Russia wanted to nuke China. And then you read that, well, the U.S. 2 years before had wanted to nuke them as part of their deal with the communists because China wasn't following their agreements that had been made when the U.S. put Mao into power. So there is some infighting going on from time to time. There's no honor among thieves with these people. So they're always double-checking each other. It's like the final round of Risk or multi-dimensional, multi-level chess. They're not just playing with two colors. Okay, it's more like 5 or 6 big factions with sub-factions all in there cheating each other. Now, what did McCarthy said? McCarthy had said there were communists everywhere taking over America. Look at us 50 years later. Big government runs everything. They tell you what size your light bulb can be, what type of toilet you can have, where your kids can, just everything's controlled now. But it's communism by the banks. They take your money and then give it to themselves through the government. But as soon as Joseph McCarthy, and if you understand this, you understand everything. As soon as Joseph McCarthy realized and went public and said, I've discovered the communist conspiracy is run by the Pentagon. And they said, excuse me, you're saying that the commies in Russia have infiltrated the Pentagon. And he said, no. I mean, go read his speeches. He said, no, the Pentagon is the communist. That's who runs the whole thing. Well, who had set up the UN in 45? Who had set up the tank and tractor factories with General Motors and Ford? Who gave Russia the weapons and the oil and the raw materials to then ship it to North Korea and ship it to northern Vietnam and to ship it into Cuba? Because, again, the U.S. gets to take part of a country. Again, it goes back to World War II. What did Hitler do? He made a secret deal with Stalin. This is now declassified in public. The Nazi/Soviet pact. They made a deal to where Hitler said he was protecting Poland from the Russians, and the Russians were protecting the other part of Poland from the Nazis. And so they came in and divided the country of Poland. I mean, if you want to defeat the New World Order, folks, you've got to understand their master strategic planning and why they're so hard to beat. And stop thinking black versus white, Christian versus Muslim, two-dimensional game of checkers. This is chess, but at multi-level. It's like playing 10 chess games at once, folks, with millions of different factors coming in. And so as soon as McCarthy realized that the communist conspiracy was run by Wall Street, he was no longer useful. Oh, he was very useful letting the feds take over Hollywood and create a right-wing backlash that they could push a police state with as part of this dialectic. But as soon as he figured out the real takeover, he was out of there in a New York minute. We'll be right back. Okay, so that was quite a bit of preface in the last segment before I get into North Korea. Fast forwarding to 1995-96, the head of ABB, the Swiss nuclear power plant company, is Donald Rumsfeld, a key gopher for the globalist. I mean, he's the guy that gets DU approved for our troops to use. He's the guy that gets aspartame approved. He's the guy that gets Prozac approved. I mean, he is the key man on so many levels. He gets, what was it, 6? We can pull up the article. In fact, I don't want to go off memory. Google nuclear reactors to North Korea, Donald Rumsfeld, ABB. But multiple reactors are sent, and they're the type that you can actually create A-bombs with the material. And the media was like, why did the Swiss sell them this? Why did the U.S. government stand by? Why did our government and Israel help, on record, give AQCon Laboratories from the late 80s through the mid-90s the components to not just make hydrogen bombs or A-bombs, but to have medium-range and long-range delivery system? There it is. There's ABB's website. ABB to deliver systems equipped to North Korean nuclear plants. There's their press release. Good job, guys. Donald Rumsfeld ran that. And he's always the head of the company for like 6 months. He'll step in and get aspartame approved. Chemical weapon feces from bacteria. You can't make this stuff up. He'll step in and get Prozac approved as the head of the company. He'll step in and get Terminator seeds approved. He'll step in and get the bioweapons of Saddam in '84. He'll step in and get the reactors transferred. Brzezinski's a similar high-level globalist. So is Kissinger. But the issue here is, I mean, in fact, here's another headline today dealing with Israel. London Guardian giving nukes to South Africa. Why? Why was Israel involved with the U.S. and England creating the Mujahideen to fight the Russians? They've always run these Muslim extremists. And again, you'll have the top terror controllers who are Muslim leaders, who are global double and triple agents, who literally have Muslim extremists working for them, who really think they're fighting for Allah out doing this. So the guy they bust in the street, he's a real Muslim terrorist. But he doesn't know he's working for Mossad or MI6. In fact, I've got another stack of mainstream articles here today. Headline, Terror Inquest May Probe MI5 Role, BBC. MI5 faces probe over July 7 bombings. MI5 faces probe over 7/7 and their role in it. How long have we told you that that's an inside job? And the families have demanded this investigation on the cover-up. And you go to the evidence. The government ran those attacks on 7/7 and had some idiots they'd hired to take part in a drill who they blew up. One guy got away, so they shot him up at Canary Wharf. That was on the news. But I'm digressing. Here it is. London Telegraph, USSR planned nuclear attack on China in '69, but buried in the declassification from the Chinese and Russian archives is that the U.S. had a secret deal with the Russians against China, and that Nixon was mad that 2 years before, Russia hadn't agreed to launch a sneak attack on China when they wanted to. And so by then, Nixon had already made a deal with China to menace Russia. So this back and forth is always going on behind the scenes. But it is on record now that our government put Mao Zedong in, who killed between 64 and 82 million people. The Chinese government says 82 million. Our government says 84 million. Whatever. After 84 million, who's counting? Well, each one's a human being. How many sports stadiums filled with 100,000 people is that, to give you an image of the humanity disappearing? And David Rockefeller writing books about how great Mao is, and editorials in the New York Times praising communism. Why would one of the richest men in the world be praising communism? Well, read his stinking column. He tells you why. Okay, I'm going to settle down. The issue is, with all of that backdrop and our government helping transfer nuclear weapons fissile material to North Korea, why would our government do that? Because they don't want Japan and South Korea living in peace. Because they won't need our bases there if they're not being menaced from the north. Japan won't need our bases if the North Korean dictator every year or so isn't shooting ICBMs over their country that land a few miles off their coast, threatening to nuke them. We'll explain this when we come back, then get into the political realignment worldwide, a bunch of economic news, a smattering of other key info, and then your phone calls and a guest coming up. But this is important, so I'm going over the backstory first.